I'm Wendy Capewell and the host of this podcast, which is all about relationships, the one with ourselves and the one with others. My guests and I will be sharing our experience and our views over the coming weeks. So, on with the show. Today I've got Dexter Moscow with me, and he is an author and business coach. And it's such a pleasure to have you here, Dexter. I'd like to tell the listeners more about you.
Right. Well, it's great to be here, Wendy, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I suppose the way I would describe myself is I've had a portfolio career. I started in advertising, which I suppose has created this love of words for me. And then I went into property. Yes, I was an estate agent, so please, people don't hate me. And then whilst doing that, I was invited to present on QVC, the shopping channel, which at that time I didn't even know what it was, but it's a live presentation shopping channel selling all manner of things. And out of that, I wrote a book and gave me the confidence. It was a business book, and it gave me the confidence to write another book, which is about the subject that we're talking about today, the subject of loss, unfortunately.
Yes. Loss is quite a big subject, isn't it? I think people relate it mostly when they've lost a loved one, but it's much broader than that. But your book is about the loss of your father, isn't it?
Yes. It's about parental loss. When I was just 10, he died of coronary thrombosis. He was only 45. And at that time, children weren't allowed to go into hospital wards. And the tragedy is that with COVID, that situation has occurred again. So many people were not allowed to be by the bedside of their loved ones, just to hold their hands and say goodbye. And was a burden, a terrible burden put upon the nurses and the doctors who attended. And my feeling is that it's something that I certainly had terrible regret about, and was able to work through it. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel the same regret, perhaps guilt, that they weren't there. And they're going to need processes and therapies and ideas to come through that. And that's the key element of what I've written about in the book.
Yes, and for a 10-year-old, trying to make any sense of it would be very, very difficult. And I sometimes think about it as a child feeling that sense of abandonment. I mean, it's not wished upon, it's not as if it's designed. But it is, they would feel abandoned, because making sense of death at 10 years old, it's hard enough as adults to even comprehend it. And I think different people have different views and beliefs, but that person no longer there, and for a 10-year-old to feel, well, where's daddy?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, as a child, did I process it? I don't think so. I remember that my uncle came to me and said, Dex, I got some terrible news. Your dad is gone. I think my first reaction was, gone where? I didn't understand it. And it is, and this is certainly what I feel is happening now. These things will come back and really hurt us. As a child, we process it to a degree. That person is, as you said, is not going to be there anymore. But what does that mean? So it's as you grow into adulthood and those key elements of our lives, when we go through a religious confirmation, or we get married and we have children and then we have grandchildren. It's those moments when it really comes back and pains us once again. And you know better than I do, our brain is like a time machine. It zaps us back to that moment.
It does, yes. And we were talking before we started recording this, and you were saying about it can be anything that can trigger those feelings: a smell, a touch, a look, a colour, anything.
Yeah. Yeah, the brain is incredible in that way, and I think it is a sense of smell and taste that doesn't get processed through the brain. It just goes back immediately to our senses, and it can really throw us back. I think that, what we're seeing now with the princes and so many other people that have lost a relative, a parent, in their youth and their very early age, they've only just started talking about it, and I think they need help as well. They're doing their own therapy in front of us, and I think so many people do that.
Yeah, I think there's such a sadness attached to those young men. I mean, they were just children. Harry's, but especially because he was younger, the younger one of the two, and to have to grieve in front of the public or cope with that, I can't imagine what that felt like. And when we see those pictures of them walking behind Diana's coffin, and they knew that the whole country, if not the whole world, was watching.
Yes.
And that is a really hard thing to go through. And then, of course, all the publicity that was around it, and again, lots of different theories and so on. It's hard enough for any of us to cope with, let alone having to cope with all of that, with everything. Even if they tried not to read it or listen to it, it's so out there that they can't ignore it.
It is a great tragedy, and I think that we see the tragedy being played out, certainly with Harry. I think with Prince William, at least he is talking about it, and we've seen these interviews with football players, this macho attitude that now is being broken down. And it's one of my mantras, being vulnerable is not a weakness, it's a strength. And especially for them, as you quite rightly say, fancy being put in that position. I wonder if they were given grief counselling. I think, the British attitude, the stiff upper lip.
Isn't it just?
Perhaps it wasn't offered. I certainly know that when I lost my dad, I wasn't offered grief counselling. It wasn't around, I don't think, in that time. But there are some wonderful organisations. One of them, Grief Encounters, which deals specifically with childhood bereavement.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes, and I don't know if I should tell this story, but certainly when I was 45, which is when my dad passed, when that hit at that age, I had a great traumatic experience. I found myself getting angry, and over the silliest little things. And so what I did was having a chat with my wife, Fran, and I said, this is not right. I'm reacting incorrectly with my own kids, with my sons. I need to do something. So I went into therapy for psychotherapy for about 1.5 years. And it was helpful. It brought out certain things that needed to be talked about. But after 18 months, the one realization was that I was angry with my father for dying.
Of course.
But what do you do with that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I guess with everything, my belief is the whole point of therapy is that we begin to integrate it into our lives. We can't change history. I mean, this is the whole thing, isn't it? We can't change what's happened. It's done, it's happened. And of course, you were unconsciously and with your dad for a long time, and not surprising. How dare he? How dare he leave you?
Yes, and that was exactly it. And it was sometime after that I said that I started going on my voyage of discovery, looking for other therapists, looking for answers that would allow me to answer that question. What do I do with that knowledge? And I said I sorted, perhaps it sorted me. But there were 3 elements that came out of that. And I've created an acronym, which I call MIC, M-I-C. And so it was meditation. And so I found a very pragmatic meditation called the Silver Mind Control Method, which is now called the Silver Method.
Okay.
where it allows us to control our own thoughts. And then the I was imagination, and I understood the secret of visualization, of visualizing something at a meditative level. And then, and this was a real revelation, if I can say it, for me. It was communication. And you would know this, it's Gestalt therapy. I found Gestalt therapy, where I was able to literally, at a meditative level, in my imagination, go back to my father's bedside and say to him, why did you go? Why did you leave us? You were a chain smoker. You were overweight. Didn't you know that this would be the cause of your demise? And so in my mind, I had this conversation. I took his part as well. As you know, with Gestalt, you sit in one chair and then you sit in the other chair.
Yeah.
That conversation. And that was so releasing. And I came out of that level as if a burden had been lifted on my shoulders, off my shoulders. Because he told me that he had regrets. He apologized. And it was a mind trick, but my goodness, was that effective for me.
Yeah.
And so that's, if you like, a key message of mine. Although they're gone, never feel that you can't have that conversation, because you can. And it's not stupid, it's not silly.
No.
And it may be, you know, in some religions talk about that still small voice. And some will say it is a spiritual element. Others will say that it is our own voice telling us something from the deep recesses of our brain. So even if it's just that mechanism, I certainly highly recommend doing that.
Yes, and I think it's very powerful. You're right. I think connecting with our inner child, that small child who was so hurt and upset, and I think there's something so many people don't. When they're adults, they're thinking in their adult head. They're not thinking as that child, and I think that when we start thinking back to what a 10-year-old would have felt, that is very powerful too, because we so often forget that. We think, well, why did that? But we're thinking right now, and that isn't how that child felt.
No.
Yeah.
I quite agree with you. I think that, you know, children perceive things far better sometimes than adults, because, you know, as adults, we're programmed to react in a particular way. And we go along with what we think is the norm. But children just react. Children just do. I think it was very interesting recently that Chris Evans on Virgin Radio had competition, 500 words. And I know that will resonate with you, because you recently had to write a piece for a book with just 500 words. And what they were asking children was about their reaction to Black Lives Matter. And they just went straight to the core of what they felt without any filter at all. And it was really powerful. So I agree with you. I think that when we tap into our childish reactions, then there lies truth and honesty and a way of overcoming things.
Yeah. And I love your Gestalt, you know, that way of dealing with it. And I think it's very powerful, putting yourself, you know, in each chairs and taking the role of that person. One of the other things I suggest to my clients is the unsent letter. Now, that's something I did with my parents, many years ago now. You can write it, handwrite it, or you can type it. Mine's on my computer. I fall over it occasionally. It's passworded. I probably, chances are I'd never ever be able to find it, you know, because I can't remember the password. But it was so great to be able to express all my emotions to them. And I think it has to be unfiltered when we do it. I think it's important that we put our true feelings, our anger, our annoyance, our upset, our pain, all of that. I mean, I can remember crying and shouting and all those feelings, because they've been locked in there for a long time. And I've never felt a need to go back to it. But it was, very poignant for me to be able to say all those things that I couldn't say to them when they were alive. I wouldn't have been able to say them even if they had been alive. I couldn't have had that conversation with them, I know.
No, and perhaps that's one of the reasons that I became an author, because the book, I suppose, is a bit of a love letter to those that have passed. It is, it's with humor as well, because there are very, very humorous moments. I mean, when my mum passed, and that's another element that people, when both parents have gone, then suddenly we're orphans. And that's not, just a throwaway line. It is a syndrome, and you understand that we have to come to terms that we are the next in line, if you like.
Yeah, which is come face to face with our own mortality.
And what happened when my mum passed was that, and she reached a reasonable age, which was 92. Actually, I think she was 92. She did lie about her age, so she could be a bit older. But the most strange thing, my mother married again, and my stepfather was a wonderful man. And actually, I'm going slightly off of the tangent, but he helped me lay the ghost of not being there when my father passed, because unfortunately he contracted pancreatic cancer. And in those final stages, I was there. I was there with my sister-in-law, helping him as the morphine took a lot of his senses away. We were there until the end. And what I couldn't do for my father, I was able to do for Jack. And so that kind of laid that ghost.
Healing,
Yeah. I'm not recommending that as a therapy for anybody.
No, but it's very interesting, isn't it? How we manage to kind of work through things and how we manage to heal. Thank you for sharing that, because it's really touching.
And what happened, having that wonderful relationship, my mother obviously took my stepfather's name, and my name of Moscow. This was so coincidental. On the day of her burial, we were waiting at the cemetery, and friends and family were arriving, and then looking at the notice board to see which burial hall my mother would be coming to. They turned around and left. And we thought, why is that happening? And my sister-in-law ran after them and said, why are you leaving? And they said, well, we can see that the funeral for Moscow has already taken place. And we said, but it's Hetty Clore that's the funeral. And when we looked on the notice board, there indeed was a Mrs. Moscow that had passed. And when we got to the graveside, she was right next to where my mother would be interred. So out of, a tragic situation or a very sad situation was humor. And my mother had a wicked sense of humor. And it was almost like her saying, that's my last joke on you. So
that is, yes, and I think there is the humour as well, isn't there? Because that brought to mind when my father died, because he was always known as John, but his birth name, his Christian name, he was baptised Arthur. Now, when I had the conversation with the vicar about the service, this vicar got very uppity and said, well, no, his Christian name is Arthur, so he has to be referred that way. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't get that. That is crazy. It's blinking bonkers. That was what he was known as. Everyone knew him as that. Anyway, it came to the funeral, and the vicar decided he would make this gesture, but instead of referring to my father as John, he referred to him as Jack. And all I could do was stop laughing, because I can imagine almost my dad banging on the lid of the coffin and saying, "You can't even get my bloody name right when I'm dead." And I guess that really, it lightened the mood, but it also reminded me of my father in a good way.
Yes.
The fact I was missing him, of course I missed him, and he should never have died when he did, all of that. But there was just that little bit of humour, like you experienced with your mother.
Yes.
It is.
And we should remember those times.
Absolutely, because life is full of light and shade, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think that it's not all black. It's not. For some people it is, but I think if we hold on to those things, it helps us, because otherwise we can go down a huge pit.
Yes, and there is some greetings when somebody passes and you're there as the mourner. Some people come up and say, sorry for your loss. Others will wish you a long life, and others will say, I wish you happy memories. And I think that is so important as a greeting for a mourner. When somebody comes up to you and says, I wish you happy memories, then, as we've discussed before, the brain is that time machine. And so, I have very few memories of my dad because of my age, but it does take you back to those fleeting images, sometimes perhaps imagined rather than real. But if we are allowed, even in the depths of our grief, to say, there were good times, they were. And so let's remember them. For those good times, and
yes.
it's another of my mantras for life, if you like.
I think it's a lovely one as well, because I often think that when somebody dies, it is a celebration of those rituals that we go through, a celebration of their life, and I think I've tried to view it that way, through all the sadness it's own, but we're celebrating that they had a life and that they featured in our lives, and all of the good things about it, rather than being overburdened with all that grief and sadness.
And I find another of the elements, apart from that MIC acronym, look for solace in the lyrics of songs as well. There's one particular song that had a tremendous impact upon me, and in fact I talk about it as well, that it's a song by Mike and the Mechanics, and it's called In the Living Years. And I was driving along very merrily listening to, I think it was Radio 2, I can't remember, this is some time ago, and I heard the second verse was, I was not there the morning that my father passed away. And it kind of just welled up in me. And I was driving and I couldn't see because of the tears in my eyes. And so I pulled over to the side and sobbed. And it was these kind of catalysts. And then the song goes on to say that we are hostages to our parents' hopes and dreams. And so it verbalized for me, or put in a lyric, what I felt deeply. And so it's another of things that I say, that if you find a song that resonates for you, although it may bring back that memory and be very sad for a moment, it is a release. It is a release. So look for comfort in the lyrics of a song as well.
Yeah. Yes, that's really a great reminder, I think, and very helpful. Yeah.
So
you were relating so much to COVID and how people have, how that loss is still going on, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And before we came on air, we were talking about those stages of grief. And we were saying, you know them better than I. So if you would repeat them, I think.
Yeah, and I think there there is a difference between the 5 and the 7 stages of grief, but whichever. I mean, people have different theories. Basically, for me, and I think we're seeing it, worldwide, is the first kind of sense was disbelief, denial, shock. Wow, this can't be true. I'm going to wake up and it's all been a bad dream. It's not happening.
Yeah.
And then mixed in there with the depression, all that loss of our liberties, not being able to see our family and friends, the restriction, almost being, lockdown. I think that lockdown actually is being locked away, is being shut away, being deprived. I think there's brings up that word, just brings up very much. It's a very heavy word.
Yeah.
And I think there was all of that kind of real sadness. I can't cope with this. How am I going to, how long is this going to last? And mixed in with that was then the anger, real anger. How can we allow this to happen? Why didn't our government take more action more quickly? Why did this happen? Where did it come from? Oh, so many mixed emotions are in there, because I think people are, there's still these debates going on, whether it's conspiracy theory and goodness knows what, which I'm not going to get into in this conversation. And then that kind of resignation and reluctance and maybe the kind of just, yes, it is resignation and acceptance, but it isn't, because that keeps coming up over the past 4 months or more. Those feelings keep coming up and back. They're bouncing backwards and forwards, and I think we're going to keep bouncing backwards and forwards. There is so much, those people that have died, that lost their loved ones, who couldn't be by their person's bedside as you couldn't be with your father.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. The injustices, the seeing that our NHS workers, all that they're doing, and other key workers, even the bins are being collected, even those simple things,
Yes.
All the basic kind of needs are being met by people who are possibly putting their health at risk. So many things. So there's so many emotions are mixed in this whole thing. And then anxiety of what's the new world going to be like?
Yeah.
How are we ready to face it? Do I want to go out? What if there is another spot? That's such a lot. And I think it's all related to that loss and grief.
I agree. And I think, and thank you for illustrating it, because I think that for me, well, I've explained that anger was somewhere that I was stuck in for some time. And then it wasn't so much guilt with me. It was regret that I couldn't be there. And in this time of COVID, I think that's so true. And I think it's very helpful for people to understand it is a process, that there are those 5 or 7 levels that we need to work through, but that at any time it can zap us back. And then, we have no control over what's happening out there. The only control we have is our reaction to that situation. And I think that, that was part of my learning, part of the processes that I went through, that when you understand that you can control that, and there are mechanisms to support that control, then you can move forward. Again, a very perhaps silly situation, but mum and dad, when I remember we used to go on trips in the car, we used to make words out of number plates. And so and even now, because my father's name was Elkan, and so when I see a number plate with ELK, I think, okay, I got the message, you're still there. And my mother's name was Hetty, and so I see a number plate, HET, Het. And I think, okay, and is it coincidental? Is it created by me? But I can be thinking through a problem or something that is concerning me, and I will see that number plate or either of those number plates and think, okay, you're there. You're there to guide me. You're there to have a conversation with me. And so, as I say, it may be the way that I deal with it, the way that I can control my thoughts. But if it helps people by playing that numbers game, that word game, then do so. Use whatever mechanisms you can that calms you down, takes you forward, and allows you to be unstuck.
Yes, such wise words. And I think there's something very much about self-soothing. We all need to, if we haven't got someone around who can help soothe us, even if they have, I think self-soothing is really important. I think too often people become self-critical and, oh, I've got to snap out of it. And there are times distractions are really good because we can't stay in that place forever. But people will distract themselves until it gets to a point where they can't cope, and then it becomes like an overflowing tank, and then it hits them when they least expect it as well. So
yes,
self-soothing and acknowledgement and being kind to ourselves and compassionate, that is really important.
Oh, absolutely. And I know we have been talking about loss of a parent through death, loss of a relative through death. But I think also the same applies for those that feel abandoned. Perhaps a parent has left. There's been a divorce or whatever, or that somebody has been adopted without understanding why that has happened. So equally, that abandonment, and I think that these kind of mechanisms we've been talking about also are useful there as well. I thank God I haven't experienced those elements, but the loss of a parental role model, certainly I can understand. And I've been very lucky through my life, through the various careers that we've been talking about, that I found mentors. I found people that certainly when I was in advertising and as a teenager, slightly rebellious because I was angry at the world. We've established that. A wonderful guy by the name of Norman Bond. He took me to aside and he said, Dex, you can do one of two things. You can carry on like you are now and go whichever direction that takes you in, or you can knuckle down, take responsibility for what you do and move forward in your life. And I will be eternally grateful. And that happened a long time ago. I will be eternally grateful for Norman. So look for the mentors. They will seek you out and recognize those people that can move you forward. Sometimes they'll be therapists. Other times they will be friends. And other times they will just be people that come into your life for a reason, and acknowledge them, accept them, and move forward with them.
Wow, what great advice you've given here to our listeners. And I hope it helps. If it helps just one person, my view is, then I think, that we've achieved something.
I hope so.
I believe we can change the world one person at a time.
Yeah. And then we'll get to that tipping point, and we're seeing it, aren't we? We're seeing the ecological movement, and I'm not a rabid green person, but look what's happened to our wildlife while we've been in this lockdown situation. Recognition of what plastics does, what harm it does, and so whether it's been enforced upon us by this pandemic, or whether it's just an evolution of understanding, then hopefully one person at a time we'll get to that tipping point where we will think of life, the world, and our part in it in a different way.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Dexter. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.
You have got a very varied life. I'm going to put all the details in the show notes that you give me about you and your life and what you do now. What's one easy way of people getting in touch with you if they're just listening and don't have those details in front of you or the ability? How's the easiest way?
The easiest way is to contact me by my email, which is dexter@dextermoscow.co.uk. And obviously dextermoscow.co.uk will find my website. It is more about the business side of my life. I haven't yet created a website for the book, A Voyage Without My Father, but I will do. But if somebody has taken solace from what we've been discussing and wants to be directed to the kind of therapies, because there are others, there's NLP, there's EFT, which are meaningless initials, but I'm very happy to discuss that with people.
Yeah,
So,
right.
if they just want to have a chat, then please make contact with me.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, I hope people get in touch with you and find a way forward and some hope and help with this. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed today's show and my guest. If you'd like to learn more about my guest or about me, then go to my website, wendycapewell.co.uk. So until next time, have a great week. Bye.